She begged for a home, but the cowboy never expected the broken Apache woman he rescued to become the bravest soul he'd ever meet. When danger followed her to his ranch, she stood between him and death, proving her worth in ways he never imagined. Like and subscribe for more powerful Wild West love stories. Let's get started! The sun dipped lower behind the jagged Arizona mesas, casting long orange shadows across the abandoned trading post. Ethan McGraw guided his horse forward cautiously, expecting nothing more than a few lost cattle wandering near the ruins. But the air felt different, still, heavy, almost waiting. When he reached the collapsed beams, he saw movement. A woman sat curled against a broken post, arms wrapped around a frayed blanket as though it were the last thing tying her to life. Her dark hair fell over her face, hiding the exhaustion and fear etched into every line of her body. Ethan swung off his horse slowly, boots crunching on the dry earth. He didn't want to frighten her. She already looked like a cornered deer. As he stepped closer, the woman raised her head. Her eyes, deep, dark, and filled with a haunting mixture of fire and sorrow, met his. The moment stretched long and fragile. Ethan had seen pain before, but never this kind. A heartbreak so raw it felt like it belonged to the land itself. When she finally spoke, her voice trembled like desert wind brushing through brittle grass. "No one wants me," she whispered. "I need a husband. I need one last chance to live." Ethan froze where he stood. The words hit him harder than he expected, not because of what she asked, but because of the desperation woven through every syllable. She wasn't bargaining. She wasn't pleading for comfort. She was holding on to the last thin thread of hope she had left. He crouched down to her level, hands open to show he meant no harm. She watched him carefully, muscles tight, as though expecting him to turn away like everyone else. Ethan's mind flooded with questions. Who was she? What happened to her? Why was she alone out here? But her trembling shoulders told him she didn't have the strength to answer them all at once. He waited, giving her time, letting silence settle around them like a blanket rather than a threat. After a long moment, she spoke again, quieter this time. She told him her name, Tala. Each word came out slow, as if choosing pieces of herself she wasn't sure she should share. She explained that her small family band had been ambushed by raiders days earlier. The survivors scattered, the rest were killed. She had escaped, but escape didn't mean safety. No tribe would take in a woman wandering alone after a raid. Settlers wouldn't trust her. Soldiers would turn her away. With her people gone, she no longer belonged anywhere. Ethan felt something heavy settle in his chest. He had lived long enough in the Arizona territory to know the brutal truth of her words. Lone women, Apache or not, were swallowed by the unforgiving land if they didn't find shelter quickly. He glanced around the empty post, imagining how long she must have sat here waiting for anyone who might pass by. Her blanket was dusty, her lips cracked, and her exhaustion ran deeper than hunger or thirst. This wasn't a woman seeking charity. This was a woman who had accepted death, unless fate intervened. She lowered her eyes again, unable to hold his gaze. "I know you will refuse," she murmured. "Everyone refuses, but if I do not ask, there is nothing left for me." Her voice wavered, then steadied, as if she had forced herself into a bravery she no longer felt. Ethan realized she had prepared herself for rejection long before he arrived. The way she clenched the blanket around her shoulders wasn't just for warmth. It was a shield against a world that had already discarded her. Ethan inhaled deeply, fighting the ache rising inside him. He had ridden into countless storms, faced down outlaws, and survived the roughest edges of frontier life. But nothing in all those years had unsettled him quite like this fragile woman asking him for a chance to keep living. Her words weren't romantic. They weren't flirtatious. They were a plea stitched with raw survival, and somehow that made them hit harder than anything sweet or scripted ever could. He sat down beside her, close enough to show he wasn't leaving, but far enough to respect her space. "Tala," he said gently, tasting the weight of her name. She looked up, startled that he hadn't already mounted his horse to continue on his way. "I don't know what brought me here at this moment," he continued softly, "but I'm not walking away." She blinked, confusion flickering across her face, as though the idea of someone staying by choice was something she no longer understood. For a long while, neither of them spoke. The desert wind whispered through the ruins, stirring dust around their feet. Ethan studied the horizon, thinking about his ranch, a place built on hard work and harder loneliness. He had been living with silence for years, filling his days with cattle and chores, never imagining that fate might send someone into his life in such a broken, vulnerable way. He didn't know what the future would look like. He didn't know what taking her in would mean. But he knew one thing clearly: leaving her was not an option. Tala's shoulders loosened just a little, as if a weight she had carried too long had shifted. She didn't smile. She wasn't ready for that yet, but something in her expression softened. She studied Ethan with careful eyes, searching for signs of pity or dishonesty. She found none. Instead, she saw a man who looked as worn by life as she was, someone who understood loss in his own quiet ways. When she finally spoke again, her voice was steadier. "You do not know me," she said. "You do not owe me anything." Ethan shook his head gently. "Maybe not," he answered, "but maybe this is the path meant for both of us." The words surprised even him, but they felt true. In that moment, the desert around them seemed to pause. The wind, the fading light, even the silence in the ruins, as if acknowledging the start of something neither of them had planned. Tala lowered her gaze, breathing deeply, letting the possibility of safety, of life, touch her for the first time since her world was destroyed. Ethan stood and offered his hand, not as an answer, not as a promise of marriage, not yet, but as a promise that she wouldn't face the next hour, the next night, or the next danger alone. After a hesitant moment, Tala reached out. Her fingers trembled as they touched his palm. It was the smallest gesture, but it felt like crossing a vast distance. When she finally rose to her feet, her blanket still wrapped tightly around her, Ethan knew one thing with absolute certainty: destiny had brought her into his path, and he could no longer imagine riding away. Ethan guided Tala into the ranch house with slow, measured steps, making sure she didn't feel hurried or watched. The small adobe home near Tucson wasn't luxurious, but it was sturdy, warm, and safe, the exact opposite of the ruins where he'd found her. He prepared a plate of stew and set it on the table, yet she only looked at it without reaching. Instead, she retreated to the corner near the window, clutching her worn blanket around her shoulders like a shield, eyes scanning the land as though danger lived in every shadow beyond the fence. Her silence pressed on the room like a second presence, heavy and uncertain. Ethan sat across from her but didn't try to pull her into conversation. He'd lived among skittish colts and wounded animals long enough to know that pushing only made fear dig deeper. Instead, he waited, letting her breathe, letting her exist without demands. But after a long stretch, he spoke softly. "You think I'm doing all this out of pity?" The way her shoulders stiffened told him he'd hit the truth straight on. Tala's eyes brimmed with tears, but she fought them back like someone used to swallowing pain. She turned her face away, ashamed not of her emotions, but of the belief she thought he would confirm. "Cowboy," she whispered, voice shaking. "Men don't choose women like me." She gripped her blanket tighter. "I bring danger, I bring trouble. You should send me away before it finds you." There wasn't bitterness in her words, only a weary certainty born from a life where she had always been the one left behind. Ethan felt something inside him twist. He wasn't a man who rescued strays for the sake of heroics. He didn't act out of charity or noble impulses. Everything he did because something in his gut told him it was right. And standing here, watching this woman shrink under the weight of her own self-blame, he saw not a burden, but someone carved by hardship into a quiet, fierce survivor. "Tala," he said. Gently, "danger finds a man whether he wants it or not, but courage is rare. You have more of it than most." His words startled her. She blinked as though she had misheard him. No one had ever spoken of her strength, not in a world where people judged her by fear, by rumors, by misunderstandings of her people. Ethan's voice held no mockery, no flattery. He meant every word. It shook her more than cruelty ever had. She looked down at her hands, scarred, trembling yet steady in their own way. For a moment she seemed unsure whether she should allow herself to believe him. The ranch settled into a strange calm that night, but tension hummed beneath the quiet. Ethan sensed something in the wind, a wrongness, a presence. And before dawn, danger indeed arrived. He spotted riders near the edge of his land, figures lurking in the half-light. They moved with a familiarity that chilled him. He counted at least 4, maybe more behind them. Tala saw his expression change. Without hesitation, she stepped forward, her blanket falling from her shoulders, like she didn't need it anymore. Those riders weren't strangers to her. The moment she saw their silhouettes, she recognized the style of their approach, the way they flanked, the way they circled before attacking. They were likely the same raiders who had torn apart her family band. "They do not attack directly," she said, voice low but steady. "They test the land first. They watch. They wait for fear." Her hands moved instinctively as she explained their tactics, how they'd come from behind the ridge, how they favored striking at night, how they counted on their targets, panicking. Her knowledge could save him. Ethan realized then that she wasn't warning him to protect herself. She was warning him to protect him. She stood beside him, shoulders squared, eyes sharp. There was no trace of the girl shivering in the ruins. This was a woman shaped by survival, by grief, but also by a fierce loyalty she rarely showed. "You saved me," she said softly, "but I will not let harm come to you." Her voice did not tremble this time. It was a vow, one she offered freely, without expectation, without asking for safety in return. Everything about her shifted in that moment. Ethan saw how her fear became resolve. The second danger threatened someone she cared for. Her trembling had not been weakness. It had been exhaustion. Now that a purpose stood before her, her strength rose like a desert storm. He found himself watching her with a mixture of awe and gratitude. Not once had she asked for protection for herself. Not once had she tried to hide behind him. She was ready to fight beside him, even if it meant facing the ghosts of her past. He saddled his horse, checked his rifle, and prepared for the possibility of a long night. Tala remained close, offering strategies, pointing out tracks, drawing lines in the dirt to show how the raiders circled before attacking. She had learned all this through pain, but instead of letting it consume her, she turned it into knowledge that could protect others. Ethan kept glancing at her, not in fear, not in doubt, but in admiration. She wasn't desperate for a husband. She wasn't seeking rescue. She was seeking a place where she could defend, contribute, stand tall. As the sky shifted to morning, the riders finally disappeared, choosing not to engage, at least for now. Ethan breathed out slowly. Tala remained still, watching the horizon until the last figure vanished. Only then did she allow her body to loosen. Ethan stepped closer, careful not to startle her. "You didn't have to do all this," he said quietly. She shook her head. "I did," she replied. "A life saved must honor the one who saved it." Her eyes softened. "You saw me when I thought I was invisible." Ethan didn't realize until that moment that something inside him had changed too. This wasn't about duty or charity or obligation. This was about seeing a woman whose strength had been buried under loss and watching her rise again. She wasn't offering him desperation, nor a plea for shelter. She was offering loyalty, courage, partnership, maybe even love. And Ethan understood something deeper. Tala wasn't asking him to choose her because she had nowhere to go. She was standing beside him because for the first time she believed she deserved to stand beside anyone.